And I think as I analyze what it is, I think it in part, up until this time, Israel was viewed everywhere as the underdog. And suddenly on our television screen, Israel is no longer seen as the underdog. But the reality is, as you look at the Middle East equation, Israel continues to be the underdog. And what we have to do is to make sure no one questions at all our strong ties, our commitment to Israel. Doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything. Mr. Ramon and Mr. Arens, who will be here shortly, do not agree on everything any more than Ben Gilman and Bill Green and I agree on everything. That's a free system. But let no one question for a moment the strength of those ties, nor our commitment to move as rapidly as possible to see that we bring people together. Genuine peace can be worked out in the Middle East that helps Israel, it helps the Arabs, it helps everyone. And I am cautiously optimistic that the new administration will be helpful in that regard. Let me close by telling a story about someone I just saw an item the other day. He called me one day, and some of you will remember he was gradually getting thinner, and it was very obvious he was dying. He called me one day, and he said, I was then in the house. He said, your colleagues in the house are stopping by, and he says they're giving me these farewells, and it's getting very maudlin and teary-eyed and sentimental. He was a very upbeat kind of a person. And he said, instead of this, why don't we just have a farewell party for me in the Raymer room off the floor of the house. Everybody will have a good time, and we'll say goodbye, and that's it. Well, I got thinking about it, David, and I thought, a farewell party doesn't seem like quite the right thing to do. So I talked to the speaker, Tip O'Neill, and I said, how about having a speech from Hubert Humphrey to the House? And he said, well, check with John Rhodes, who was then the Republican leader. But he said, it's against all precedent to have a senator speak to the House. You don't know how demeaning it is to the House to have a senator speak to the House. But John Rhodes said, great. Hubert Humphrey got up to a jammed House in an emotional appeal. He knew he was dying, and we all knew he was dying. It was about 7 weeks before he died. And I shall never forget this. One of the things he said, so far as we know, we can have peace and freedom and justice and opportunity on that small planet. That, my friends, with some single dramatic gesture, you build it brick by brick by brick. One of those bricks is friendship between the United States, for Israelis, for Arabs, for Africans, for people in Asia, for people everywhere.
Peace with them.
I got these names here. I got the names.
I'll tell you when they come up. Xavier is here, Pine is here. Yeah, they're all here.
Okay. Yeah, I want to do so. The minister is accompanied by the Honorable Eitan Ben-Zur, Deputy Director General in charge of North America for the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Honorable Yohanan Bain, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Ambassador Yuri Savi, Israel's Consul General in New York, and their lovely wives. Tonight we have the unique privilege of having with us the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel, Moshe Arens. There are few individuals who better typify the spirit of America-Israel friendship than Minister Arens. Educated as an aeronautical engineer in the United States, he served in the U.S. Army during World War II and as Israel's ambassador to Washington during 1982 and 83. He is one of Israel's most articulate spokesmen and is a frequent guest on American television. Minister Arens, who arrived in the country just hours ago, departs for Washington, D.C. tomorrow morning for talks with President Bush. I am tremendously pleased to present the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel, the Honorable Moshe Arens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Honoree, Mr. Brennan, Senator Simon, Congressman Green, my colleague from the Israeli Knesset, Chaim Ramon, the Honorable Herbert Tenzer, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. I come to you directly from a concert of the Israeli Philharmonic held at Carnegie Hall. I understand that I have here a hungry audience that has not yet eaten, waiting for me to arrive. I can only console you by telling you that I haven't eaten either. And some of you may have heard the story of the after-dinner speaker who would not eat while everybody was having their dinner. He would sit there concentrating on a speech. And one evening, as usual, not eating, thinking about what he was going to say, while everybody else was having their dinner, got up, made a speech, and when he got through, he asked his wife, "Well, how was I?" She said, "You might just as well have eaten." Well, it is a fortunate coincidence that I've arrived in the United States and have the opportunity of meeting with friends of Israel here at the Israel-American Friendship League on a stopover on my way to meet with friends of Israel in Washington, the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, the head of the National Security Council. As you all know, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, one of the youngest democracies in the world. And here is another coincidence. It just so happens that this year elections in Israel and elections in the United States were held at just about the same time, exactly a week apart. We have new administrations in both countries, and this is the first opportunity for representatives of these new administrations to meet, to discuss common problems, to coordinate our plans, to make an effort to work in concert in order to obtain common objectives that serve the common interests of Israel and the United States. Two countries that share common ideals, common values, and therefore also common strategic interests. I hope that my visit to Washington next week will make an additional contribution to that very solid foundation of friendship, to that relationship of alliance between Israel and the United States that has been built over the past 40 years. This year, we are concentrating on peace. Peace for Israel and peace for the Middle East. Peace in the area has been a very slow process. It took 30 years for Egypt to come to the peace table with Israel, 30 years and 5 wars. We in Israel anticipated that within a matter of months after signing that treaty, or at the most a year or two, the other Arab countries would join the peace process, but that has not happened, through no fault of our own. Our hand has been outstretched for peace throughout the years, as it is today. But we feel that it is incumbent on us at the present time to make a special effort to introduce new momentum, renewed momentum into the peace process, and we are sure that we will have the help and the advice of the United States in this very important move. There is, I believe, a great deal of understanding in the United States for Israel, for the difficulties that Israel faces, for the fact that in many ways Israel is an island in the Middle East. Not an island geographically, but the only democracy in the area, surrounded by countries that are still governed by authoritarian or totalitarian regimes, that have a long tradition of fanaticism, brutality, intolerance to any kind of minority, some with very little reticence when it comes to the use of violence. The Middle East is a hostile environment. Some of the countries in the area, like Iraq and Syria and Libya, have very large armies. Some have used chemical warfare in hostile activities against other nations. These very countries insist that they're in a state of war with Israel, and Israel is still, to this day, making a great, almost superhuman effort to maintain a level of alertness, to maintain a level of readiness, so that we can deter war, so that we can deter aggression, and so that we can defend ourselves if we have to. These past year and a half, we have faced an additional dimension of violence over and above the warfare on the battlefield, the acts of terrorism that we've had to contend with over the years. And this is violence in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Violence committed on a large scale, using firebombs thrown at cars traveling on the roads, people burned alive, rocks being thrown into the windshields of passing vehicles, people being knifed on the streets. For a democratic country like Israel, it is not easy to contend with this kind of violence. We have standards and norms, our morality that we have to live with. We have to restrict our armed forces very severely, sometimes under grave provocation. And we know that when television audiences throughout the world see pictures of what seem to be unarmed civilians, including women and children, faced by soldiers in full battle dress, intuitively the sympathy may go out to what seem to be the unarmed civilians. And it is only a full understanding of the context of these confrontations, a full understanding of the dangers that Israel faces, that can lead the audiences to the correct conclusions as to what is really happening in the area. We believe that giving in to terrorism encourages further violence. We believe that giving in to violence could spell disaster. And nevertheless, this time, and particularly at this time, we must make a special effort. If we cannot convince those who have been recalcitrant in the past to come forward and negotiate peace with us, the surrounding countries, all except Egypt, who insist that they are in a state of war with Israel, to come forward and negotiate peace, and to find amongst the Palestinian population in the West Bank and Gaza interlocutors, authentic representatives, those that have a constituency, those that would be elected in democratic elections as we know them in Israel and you know them in the United States, to come forward and talk, not firebombs, not knifings, not violence, but come forward and talk peace. I don't need to tell you that Israel does not need to be urged to move towards peace, to bend every effort to bring peace to the area. We pay for the absence of peace with the highest price of all, with the lives of our young men. So this is a time when your friendship, the friendship of the government of the United States, is especially important to us. This friendship lends strength to the people of Israel. It will help us to overcome Muslim fundamentalism, fanaticism, radicalism, terrorism, the dangers surrounding us. It will help us to overcome them, and it will help us to attain peace.
That concludes our program for this evening. We'll eat now.